All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Diabetes Sisters Life Class webinar, Get Ahead of the Holidays, Tips for Making It Easier. My name is Anna Norton. Many of you know me. I'm the CEO of Diabetes Sisters, and I will be moderating today's webinar. I'm really excited today to introduce Jennifer Smith. Jennifer Smith, she's lived with type 1 diabetes for 28 years, and she has firsthand knowledge of the day-to-day events that can affect diabetes management. She has attended diabetes-specific sports training camp back in 2008, where she discovered her passion for achieving fitness goals while living healthfully with diabetes. In 2009, she successfully completed her first 70.3 Ironman triathlon. This, of course, brought a deeper understanding of athletic training requirements and the importance of nutrition to realize athletic goals in living with diabetes. She works with athletes to aid with optimized management and improved performance. She has a 3.5-year-old boy and has navigated pregnancy with diabetes as well. She works intensively with women from preconception through pregnancy and delivery and postpartum to ensure optimal health for both baby and mother. Jennifer holds a bachelor's degree in human nutrition and biology from the University of Wisconsin. She's a registered and licensed dietitian, certified diabetes educator, and certified trainer on most makes and models of insulin pumps and continuous glucose monitoring systems. She's an active member of the American Diabetes Association, the American Association of Diabetes Educators as well. And she's also contributed very much for the Diabetes Sisters website. As a talented dietitian, diabetes educator, athlete, and person living with diabetes, Jennifer is in a very unique position to assist integrated diabetes services where she currently works and their clients. Today, Jennifer is back to discuss tips for making diabetes management easier, especially as we embark on fall and the upcoming holiday season. She's going to provide great tips on how to stay on top of management while enjoying the upcoming holidays. Please welcome Jennifer to lead us in the next half hour.
Yay! Thanks, Anna. It's really nice to be back. I know I did a webinar last fall for Diabetes Sisters, which was awesome, and it's always nice to be able to talk to the community of people who you have a very deep connection with life-wise. Even if I don't know any of you, it's nice to have a connection point. So hopefully some of the tips and things I'll talk about today will be beneficial and helpful, especially again as we kind of move into the holidays. I think a lot of these tips are helpful year-round, but especially around the holidays when things kind of get a little bit jumbled as far as schedules and whatnot. It's kind of nice to just have them as reminders, essentially. So Anna did a really awesome job introducing me, so I won't go through a little bit about me since she already told you all about me. I think one of my favorite authors who has literally nothing to do with diabetes is Michael Pollan. He's got many books on the market, but one of my favorite quotes that I think really moves into the realm of benefit, especially life with diabetes, is he talks a lot about clean eating, and one of my favorite quotes is, "Eat food, not too much, mostly plants." So it doesn't really define, getting rid of a specific type of food at all. It's really just defining where we can really clean up our typical meal plan, because really food is a major part of our diabetes management, right? And it's one of the key three components. So two big components in this clean eating. One is to really try to simplify your eating or simplify your food. And another then is to kind of the excess, or identify where the excess might kind of sneak in. One of the ways to simplify eating is to essentially try to evaluate your hunger. And with diabetes, especially if you've had diabetes a long time, sometimes evaluating your hunger is hard because we've been taught to eat from a very early age, some of us, to eat on a schedule or eat on a plan, especially depending on where we started with the type of insulin we might have been on eons ago. So evaluating your hunger is sometimes a newer thing to start to pay attention to. But if you're hungry, eat. And our body does give us signals for hunger, but we do have to pay attention to them. And again, with diabetes, paying attention is something that we really do have to put conscious effort into. On the opposite end of that, as far as diabetes is concerned, to get rid of excess, we have to also then, within this hunger component, evaluate if our hunger is relative to symptoms. Because, of course, when our blood sugar is too low, we can be very, very hungry. So if you're hungry because you haven't eaten a meal and you've kind of skipped it or it's been delayed, then go ahead and eat a meal or add a snack in. But if you're symptomatic or if your hunger is because your blood sugar is too low, then remember to treat the low blood sugar, but don't eat for it. Those are some really good ways to, again, kind of just clean up eating and get rid of excess calories kind of coming in. A really good way to get rid of excess as well when you're evaluating your hunger is kind of use the apple test. If you're not hungry enough to eat an apple or, something healthy, let's say, then you're not really hungry and you may not necessarily eat it. A lot of people eat from boredom. So try to evaluate whether or not you are actually thirsty. Thirst can often be seen as hunger, so try to pay attention to those, those different pieces and evaluate. When you have, in between meals, the ability to take in something like a sparkling water or, something like that that's not necessarily caloric, but that does taste good. I know water can get sometimes kind of boring, but if you can essentially add in some things that are non-caloric, don't necessarily mean you need to take extra medication or take extra insulin. Those are kind of ways to evaluate. If you've done that, give yourself about 15, 20 minutes. If the water didn't really help to calm the hunger, then maybe truly you are hungry. Maybe there wasn't enough at the meal that you had, or maybe there's been too long between your meal times, and it might then be a good idea to add a snack between meals if you commonly have more than 4 or 5 hours between, one meal to the next. We also really want to kind of consider balance and portion. I like to encourage within clean eating using an 80-20 kind of plan. It's really a way to consciously remember the importance of why food is necessary. Eating is a basic necessity of life. We cannot go without food, and especially, with diabetes, it's a major component to our management. So following an 80-20 plan means that 80% of the time, what we choose to eat really fills our nutritional need. Essentially, our macronutrients, our carbs, our proteins, our fats, in whatever percent you're putting those into your typical day, 80% should come from clean-based foods in those categories. The 20% of the plan is really relative to feeding your soul then. These are things that might sneak in, and I think this is a good place that we have to also then put this into effect with holiday eating. Because on a holiday type of basis or schedule, you may have a couple of days a week where you have a holiday meal planned with friends, with family, a social outing, something for work. But it's not 100% of every day for the most part, aside from maybe something like Thanksgiving, let's say. So using this 80-20 plan, 80% of a day on a holiday or 80% of a week of a holiday-based week, you're eating clean, eating healthy, getting the foods in that, satisfy your true nutrition need, whereas 20% of that time really breaks down into allowing for those treats and things that do come up with holiday eating. What that looks like in a week where you essentially have 21 meals over a 7-day period, if you break that down into an 80-20 plan, really you're looking at about 18, 19-ish meals that essentially are healthy for you, and the rest of the 20% being about 3 to 4 meals essentially allows you leeway for that soul-based eating, something that's a treat or grandma's apple pie or what you might like to indulge in at times. Within all of this, I think a nice place to start is to evaluate what your current intake kind of looks like. Most people typically have about 20 to 25 common foods that they eat on a very, very regular basis. So if you can evaluate your intake around these foods when you're considering diabetes, if you've kept a log of these common foods, you can also then log what happens, what's the trend in your blood sugar around these common meals. Maybe you have the same lunch every single day because it's easy for you to pack, but you haven't really figured out how your blood sugar, looks around that meal. Record it, figure it out, or take the 20, 25 most common foods that you put on your grocery list, evaluate when those are in a meal, what ends up happening. Because with records like this, it helps you to essentially evaluate if your insulin or the medication you take is actually as effective as you need it to be. Is the dose you're taking working? Does the time of the medication, the timing of when you take your medicine, does it work for you? Does its action time actually work to your benefit, or does something need to change? And with logs around these common foods, it doesn't mean that you're logging everything, but it is logging at least the things that you're doing on a regular basis. This can be very beneficial then, especially again when holidays come up, because again, if you're following that 80-20 plan and 80% of the time you're eating most of your common foods, then when oddities do sneak in, somebody brings you the plate of cookies or, your aunt's favorite fudge or whatever it might be, you can say, okay, well, I didn't evaluate how my blood sugar looks around this, so give yourself a little bit of leeway. Maybe do some extra looking, take a look online and find, some ways to essentially maybe carb count a little more effectively, especially if you have holiday meals that consistently bring in foods that are not your norm. Again, pumpkin pie. Maybe you have no idea what the carb count is in a piece of pumpkin pie, but if you know it's always going to be there at your typical Thanksgiving or holiday meal, look it up ahead of time and kind of gauge. That way you're a little bit more prepared. So again, just evaluating your day-to-day intake can take about 75 to 80% of the guesswork out. Around the holidays, we always, worry about weight gain. And I think one of the biggest things to consider is try to maintain current weight when the holidays start. Try not to gain, and do not plan this to be the time of the year to try to lose weight. Try to make a commitment to essentially maintain the weight that you're at today and not put any extra pounds on over the holidays, between, let's say, November 1st or maybe mid-November through the very 1st of January, when technically most of the holidays and holiday parties are kind of over. If you lose weight, awesome. You must be doing something fantastic. But the goal really is to essentially not try to gain anything. Two main goals within this, or two main things to look at for that maintenance, are trying to make healthy meal swaps or healthy cooking swaps for typical favorite high-calorie holiday desserts or foods. Some really good cooking swaps are things like using applesauce or pumpkin or a pureed fruit in place of something like butter or oil in a recipe. We can also replace sour cream with things like a low-fat or regular Greek yogurt. It cuts a lot of the fat calories and you still get the same flavor and consistency. You can try doing fruit toppings with, a dusting of like cinnamon or something on top instead of sugar and fat-filled icings or sugar-filled pie fillings. You can always try a regular fruit topping. A good substitute for like chocolate in a recipe is truly cocoa powder. You actually get a heavier, more rich flavor from the powder rather than the actual chocolate or chocolate sauce. Substituting things like egg whites or even flax meal for whole eggs. You can essentially substitute 2 egg whites for a whole egg in most recipes. If you're replacing an item like ice cream, maybe you don't necessarily replace the ice cream, but you replace maybe the fat content of it. Look for something that's a little bit lower in fat I don't necessarily say go fat-free, mainly because most often when we do fat-free, there's a load of extra sugar that's been added. Try to stick with serving size. Most commonly, we derive the most benefit from desserty types of items from the first bite and the last bite. So sharing a dessert or something can be really beneficial because you always get a first bite. And if you're sharing it with somebody, there are a lot less bites in between the first and the last bite. Eventually bake mini items too. Instead of baking a full, huge pumpkin pie, bake little mini pumpkin pie tarts. You'll probably get about a third of the calories, including the fat and the sugar content. So those are other options just for changing out or swapping some of those food components. The other big thing that a lot of people change when holidays sneak in is their workout routine. And one of the best components of a weight management plan, not even considering diabetes, but in a weight management plan, the biggest component that's always added is keep your workout routine. The studies that have shown those who continue normal workout routines through holiday seasons typically have an easier time at least just maintaining their weight. They may not have weight loss, but again, maintenance here is the goal. So the benefit of both of these goals being the food swapping, you swap it out, you're getting less calories, less sugar. Your blood sugar is more likely to respond to your insulin appropriately, less need to add extra insulin for corrections. So again, there in itself is also a weight management component. And then just moving your body, of course, helps your insulin to work a lot better. And it also respond better to those treats and things that might come in that you are eating that are irregular. Your body's going to respond a lot better if the normal movement is typically there. Also, get used to using tools. Excuse me. Your measuring tools and different types of technology. Now, at your uncle's house or the social party for work, you're likely not going to have measuring cups along with you, or you're not going to pull a kitchen scale out of your purse or your handbag or whatever. But if you're using measuring tools in your typical day-to-day, you will be much more able to actually eyeball a portion in a food that may be irregular for you to eat. There are a lot of really great estimation tools that help with holiday fare then when you don't have access to cups and scales. Things like using a fist. A woman's clenched fist is about a 1 cup measuring portion. The palm of a hand is a good portion, just for an example of a 3-ounce cooked piece of meat. A tennis ball is a really good example of about a 1/2 to 3/4 cup portion. So again, knowing these visual tools can be really good, again, when you're not at home or not in your own environment. The other to this is to be a little bit more precise. Technology, of course, has come a long way. No longer do we have to carry our Calorie King book with us. We can actually have the Calorie King app on our phone or on our smart device. Essentially, there are 2 other really good carb counting that are visual tools, apps, that I love even better than the Calorie King. One of them is Carbs and Cals, and the other one is called Figwe. These are excellent because they actually show a, let's say you typed in something like mashed potatoes. It would actually bring up about 4 to 6 different pictures of a portion of mashed potatoes on your typical average dinner plate. You click on the photo that looks like the portion that you placed on the plate that's sitting in front of you, and up comes all of the nutrition facts, including the carbs, fats, proteins, fibers, and everything in that portion. So it's a learning tool as well as a really good resource tool. For tracking some of your stuff, using things like MyFitnessPal can be very beneficial. If you're really trying to log everything, My Sugar Companion Pro is a really excellent app to be able to use. So all of these essentially are really good tools to make use of, not only at home but possibly on the go, and can be very helpful then essentially when you are out of your normal habit around the holiday times. One thing to consider around the holidays as well is dosing. Now, this takes into consideration mostly those who might be using insulin. Oral medications are a little bit different, and dosing isn't as specific to carbohydrates. But for injections or for those who use an insulin pump, there are a couple of tips and tricks that can be beneficial for dosing around the holidays. If you give injections, you can try one trick of giving a small dose of insulin along with each course of the meal. Let's say you start with an appetizer, you kind of move on to the main entree, you might have a dessert, and let's say this takes place over a 3 to 4 hour kind of time period. If you took a very large dose of insulin at the beginning of that meal, assuming a amount of carb that you may choose to eat over all of those courses, very likely for you to have a low blood sugar before all of that food actually gets consumed. So giving small incremental doses for what you try to count along the way can be beneficial if you use injections. Another really good use for both those injections and those who are pumpers, follow your CGM trend. If it is in use, it's one of the best ways to actually evaluate how is your body responding to that dose of insulin, and essentially, should I delay the dose? Do I need to pre-bolus a little bit? Am I on the rise? Am I falling? Am I stable? There's a really great app that's available as well that does keep track of the insulin that you've previously bolused so that you don't stack your insulin. It's called Rapid Calc Diabetes Manager, and it works very much like an insulin pump as far as all of its calculations. It just, of course, doesn't give you the insulin. It just calculates the dose for you. So that's a nice option. For those who are on pumps, of course, there are a couple of options. You can dose just like with injections per each course of a meal. You give a bolus with the appetizer you're going to eat, with the entree, maybe one with dessert. There's a beverage at the end of the meal, anything like that, kind of dose as it goes. Again, pumps have the insulin on board feature, so it does help to prevent stacking. You can also, some people find use of something like the pump's prolonged bolus, or what we typically call an extended bolus, square dual wave combo bolus. They're all called something different depending on the pump that you use. It essentially allows some insulin to be dosed right now, as well as some insulin delivered for your determined extended amount of time. Maybe it's for 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, etc. So these are some dosing strategies that can help for those who might be using insulin. Around all of this, one of the biggest, most important things is looking at your data. We have an unbelievable amount of technology at our fingertips now. Smart pumps, continuous monitors, they all download to some cloud-based or software-based system. And if you take the time to download your devices and evaluate your data, you can try to keep notes for a short amount of time and to look for trends, especially as you're kind of paying attention to those 20 to 25 foods that you eat regularly. You're trying to figure out information around that. Pay attention essentially to the data that comes with it then when you download. This can be especially helpful around holidays. If you've had your products for a long time, you can look at past holidays. Look up dates around holidays in the past 1 or even 2 years. See what your trend tends to look like, maybe in the day or the days around those holidays. See what tends to happen comparative to days that are not holiday days. Again, using some of the tricks, the tips, continuing workouts can really help you data-wise to evaluate where a change might need to be in that season of the year. And also, within this, looking at your data, you eventually learn to trust yourself, and you can learn to self-adjust. So you don't have to wait for that endo visit every 3 to 4 months to make an adjustment. You can make changes today that are going to help right now. And you can do that because really we're the ones that live with diabetes 24/7. No one is there at 2 o'clock in the morning. The doctor is certainly not in his office. So how we learn to evaluate can help us also learn how to self-adjust more appropriately. And if you need help with it, find a good CDE. Find somebody who can meet your needs where your needs begin. Make sure that they're not focusing just on their agenda or on what they need to check mark in the box, on their sheet when you come in the room. Essentially, this educator should be able to teach you to look at your downloaded data and essentially teach you how to analyze the data so that, again, you can self-adjust down the road. They should also listen to your questions and not judge you, because remember, your experience with diabetes is your experience. It is unique. Your day is very different than my day. So it's important that they remember that. Also, they should help you understand all the factors that can affect your blood sugar control. We've got medications to use, we've got food that we, pay attention to, but there are many, many, many other factors that can have effect on blood sugar, and those need to be talked about. Prior to a holiday, you may want to even bring in favorite or typical food choices to talk about. They might be able to help with improved management. They might help you carb count or guess a little bit better. They might even be able to help you evaluate your recipes and make better choices or swap some things out. Also, use resources. So if you can't find a good CD, there are lots and lots of good people who actually live with diabetes. Think Like a Pancreas, of course. I work for Gary Shiner with Integrated Diabetes. He has an excellent book that most people know. My good friend Ginger Vieira has Your Diabetes Science Experiment. Many people have now read Sugar Surfing, and I know that Dr. Ponder also does seminars around the country, which is excellent. Pumping Insulin has been around for a very long time, great resource. Sherry Kohlberg focuses mostly on adjustments if you're an athlete. And then Brandy Barnes and Nat Strand wrote together The Woman's Guide to Diabetes. All of these are great resources. Finally, try to really make time for your own diabetes management, because it does take time. It's really not going to fall into place without some of your own analysis. Don't depend just on your doctor every 3 to 4 months to go in. Analyzing all of that 3 to 4 months worth of data, it's hard. And if you don't have any questions within that, they have a hard time pinpointing where to start. So really, Stephen Ponder says, learn the tools you need to get the results you want. Learn to trust your instincts, essentially. Learn to wax your board. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your attention and time, and hopefully some of these great tips and tricks will work to your benefit. I don't know if there are any questions along the way or anything I can answer.
Hi, Jennifer. It's Anna. Thank you so much for all of that. We actually do have a couple of questions and comments. The first is when you were mentioning measuring spoons and things that you can use at home, Live Liga sells a set of serving spoons that are good for table, and they are measured out by cup and half a cup and a quarter cup. And so you can put them out at a holiday table and have a really great experience while serving your dinner and keeping in mind your portion control. So
that's awesome. I think I've actually seen those at some of the conventions. Those are really nice.
They're very beautiful, and they're great for Thanksgiving and and any holiday really, or anytime you want to dress up your table. We have another question. We have a question about the carb counting apps that you mentioned. Are there any carb counting apps besides Calorie King? Are they free, or is there by subscription, or is there another kind of charge for those?
Yeah, the ones that I mentioned, the Carbs and Cals, and then the Figwe, I believe that they're both of them is they both have a minor cost. I can't remember what the cost of them is. I do know that they are not free, but it's a one-time cost. So it's not something that you have to pay monthly in order to continue to use, and the app continues to get updated once you've purchased it once.
Okay, great. And then the final question that I have, it's a little bit longer, but so someone who's listening in wants for you to please speak to the calorie, sugar, and blood glucose effects of alcohol, especially during the holiday period when you have so many more social events that include alcohol. Are there more or different effects on blood glucose from having alcohol multiple nights in a row?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I knew somebody was going to ask about that, so rather than putting a confusing slide up that only gave some basics, I'm glad somebody did ask. So the general rule of thumb is that if you regularly have a beverage, let's say even once or twice a week, you can, again, evaluate and kind of gauge what's your typical response to alcohol. When the holidays come in, or any social outing, a birthday, or anything that's a special occasion, we can, of course, get exposed to it maybe a little bit more. And in that case, what we typically recommend is, especially if most of these social outings are kind of taking place in the evening, alcohol, of course, it's a toxin to our system. Even though it tastes good, it's a toxin. So essentially, our body tries to deal with the toxin, and the organ in the body that deals with it is your liver. Now, your liver has a role in managing blood sugar, especially if blood sugar is dipping too low. But if there is a toxin, your liver will first address the issue at hand. So in the aftermath, meaning many hours post drinking, many people experience a drop in blood sugar, and that's due to the alcohol effect and the liver's essentially stopping its output of glucose drip and dealing with the toxic component of alcohol. So overnight, we would usually recommend a decrease in the basal rate if you're using an insulin pump. If you are using a long-acting insulin, then we may recommend an adjustment back in the long-acting insulin if you take it as an evening injection. Not so much as if you take it in the morning, but if you take an evening injection of your long-acting insulin, we would essentially adjust that dose down. And what that helps to do, both the temporary basal decrease as well as the decrease in the basal injection, it helps to decrease the lows that are usually going to happen 4, 5, 6, 7, even 8 hours post-consuming alcohol. Typically, again, for the most part, any alcohol that's over about 2 beverages consumed in the evening, we would want to do some type of basal adjustment to accommodate and prevent a low overnight. For the basal rate adjustment, we would usually suggest adjusting the basal down, starting at the end of the night when the drinking is completely done, and then we would essentially say 2 hours of adjustment in basal per beverage consumed. So at the end of the night, let's say it's midnight, you've had 4 glasses of wine through the course of the evening. That's 4 glasses, 2 hours per glass. You would adjust your basal down over an 8-hour time period so that you don't end up having lower blood sugars. We tend to find that during the daytime, it's not as much of an issue with beverages during the day. One, people don't tend to be as heavy consumers as they might in the evening or a social outing in the evening. But secondly, you're also awake during the day. And we're also eating more in the aftermath of perhaps socializing at a lunchtime kind of outing. You're going to be eating in the aftermath of that, and that can kind of compensate for some of that alcohol issue. There is also the train of thought that if you are eating with alcohol, it does help to tamper some of the effect of the alcohol dropping blood sugar in the aftermath or in the hour, 2 hours after you drink. So that can definitely help prevent lows initially. More often than not, beverages that can contain sugar, beer included, as well as some of those fruity holiday kinds of beverages you might have, the carbs need to be considered. So that would be a time, if you've got some favorite drinks, look them up, find out how much carb is typically in your average serving, and utilize that, because the carbs in that are going to hit you Eventually, the alcohol will get into your system and may cause the low later. But the carbs themselves right now are going to need to be covered. And within that coverage, especially again for those who use insulin, consider how long it takes you to consume a beverage. If you are the type of person who has a bottle of beer and you can sip on it over an hour and a half, and it doesn't take you 10 seconds to guzzle it down, then perhaps if you're using a pump, you would bolus using one of those extended bolus features so that you're not getting the whole bolus up front. You would get it dripped in over the course of time that you plan to drink or consume that beverage. For the sweeter types of beverages, something like a daiquiri or something that's got juice in it, typically a normal bolus up front is the best way to go, because even if you do sip it, tends to be that the sugars in those are going to get in a little bit faster than they would from something like beer. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, thank you so very much.
Yeah.
And we are actually out of time, but I wanted to thank Jennifer again for coming back to Diabetes Sisters, for sharing her knowledge with us, both her book knowledge and her own experience. And before we sign off, I want to thank everyone for registering and participating in today's webinar. We had over 40 people register, and as promised, we've taken all of the registrants and entered them into a drawing for a copy of Gary Shiner's book, Until There's a Cure. Today's winner is Andrea Grun, so congratulations, Andrea. We'll be contacting you to send out your prize. If you would like to listen to this webinar again, we will have it posted on our website at diabetessisters.org tomorrow morning. We will provide the audio and the presentation slides that Jennifer went through today. And please, I urge you to mark your calendars for our next webinar on appealing medical denials. It will be sponsored by Merck and scheduled for October 19th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time and led by diabetes patient advocates Melissa Lee and Cherise Shockley. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us.